Welcome back to my video essay series on Valiant Hearts: The Great War. In this video, we're going to be talking about the development team behind the game and how their past and experiences lent itself to creating this game. So first of all, we're going to back up a little bit. We're going to talk about Ubisoft, the large parent company that owns Ubisoft Montpellier, the studio that created the game. So this is a key indicator because we need to talk about it. It's a company that employs 18,000 people. And really, I think an important part of this is you would expect Valiant Hearts to be created in a small studio with 6 people out in the outskirts of this, what we generally would call it an indie studio. Now, Ubisoft, as a massive conglomeration, is much more attuned to putting out games that would be maybe best equated to the Marvel series, putting out games every year in Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, the Splinter Cell series, anything with Tom Clancy, Watch Dogs. They release massive games that sell millions and millions of copies. So how did, within the framework of this massive multinational conglomeration, did a game like Valiant Hearts get created? And so this is where we arrive at the story of Ubisoft Montpellier, and a bit of a subsect within that. Ubisoft Montpellier originally was a smaller studio. It has since grown, but what's key about that is the founder of this studio helped develop an engine, or a framework as they call it, called UbiArt. With this framework, people who would not necessarily have the most technical acumen would be able to use drawings and art that they created to make games easier. So it became an opportunity to really explore some unique artistic opportunities for the studio and the publisher, Ubisoft, to try out some new things. And with this, they launched a few games with it. Most notably, the Rayman series from 2011 until 2020, and Child of Light are some big titles that came out of that. But also, this is where Valiant Hearts comes in. It's a game based on the artistic framework of this development platform. So this is where it's important to talk about the game's creative director, and this is a gentleman by the name of Jon Finis. He provides the inspiration for Valiant Hearts. And I think his story is crucial to understanding the story that this game is portraying. Finis grew up in France, and like many Frenchmen around his age, his stories from his grandfather and grandmother were often about the time during occupied France in the Second World War. So the wars and his story are always intertwined. Now, when he became fixated on writing about the First World War, this is where his story plays a crucial part of this. He begins researching letters from soldiers, and in talking with his grandparents, he brings up the fact that he's working on this new project, and his grandmother goes upstairs and brings down a box of letters from his great-grandfather from the First World War. Now, obviously, he had been aware of his family's history and legacy with the war, but I think when you get that opportunity to really examine the tangible evidence of your family's history in this, and his great-grandfather's letters left a real impact on him, to the point where, when he was writing for Escapist magazine, he wrote a note regarding how he responded to this, and in his own words, quote, "This legacy and seeing the humanity within these letters changed my perception of war completely. I started to see it not as all-out conflict, but instead a combination of thousands of unique stories, most of them belonging to scared young men away from home who didn't want to kill each other." Again, I've talked about this in the introduction, but the war games we make tend to be glorifiers. which is why the Second World War is so popular to make in video games. It is an easy war to choose the good and the evil that exists in the world. Now, why is it so hard then to make games about the First World War? Is it because there's no good and evil? It's hard to choose a side to fight for? I'd argue yes. And I think that Finis has certainly recognized that. So much so that this impact of his great-grandfather's letters left on him absolutely impacted his career, not simply the game, but he's now made 2 profound games about this. Valiant Hearts: The Great War was released in 2014, and 4 years later, he made 1111 Memories Retold. And as he describes it, it's an emotional adventure that retells the stories of life on both sides of the front 100 years ago. It is not a story of good against evil or one team versus another, but a story of 2 personalities on opposing sides of the front line. And this is verbatim what we're talking about here. Now, in the videos that you're going to see after this and before this, I dive deeper into whether his message is done well and how he portrays this. But in this moment, straight from the horse's mouth, we see that this game is not about sides, and it's not about winning or losing. It's about the people caught in the war. The war is not a thing to be striven for or to do what's necessary, but rather a thing that just happens around the thousands of people that existed during it. And I believe that he took that to heart, and this game is a product of that. So this is where the development team has an impact on a game. Much like how you might hear about Steven Spielberg and why he chose to make things in Saving Private Ryan, you can find this in games as well. And I think that's incredibly crucial. So maybe if there's one thing to take away from this video, it's that if you're going to do examinations of the media and the art that you consume, oftentimes it's useful and perhaps needed to examine the team that's behind it and what their perspectives are and what their stories are.